Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Adage's Roundtable on Gen Z and AI. My name is Asa Heiken. I'm a tech reporter at Adage, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. Before I introduce our guests, I want to give a brief rundown on what to expect over the next 30 minutes. We all know that in the past year, AI has taken over advertising. I'm sure most of us here are also familiar with the double-edged nature of this technology. On the one hand, AI poses all kinds of possibilities for marketers, from content creation to data analysis to many tasks in between. On the other hand, the rapid development of AI has left in its wake an equally large number of concerns, including but not limited to issues over copyright, data privacy, internet bias, and excessive job replacement. This duality is at the heart of most conversations about AI. What is not typically addressed is how younger generations feel about it. Why does this matter? Well, Gen Z is the most technologically savvy generation of consumers and will likely be able to sniff out dry, ineffective, or manipulative uses of AI before anyone else will. It's also important to remember that Gen Zers are going to be around for many, many more years, catering to their needs. Embracing technology in a way that makes sense to them should be top of mind for marketers. To this end, let's have a conversation with 3 members of Gen Z, 4 if we're including myself. Julia Dixon is a senior cultural strategist at Weber Shandwick. Clay Lute is a member of Burns Communication Group's Z-Suite panel on Gen Z. And Allen Pham is a business media strategist for Edelman, where he was also a member of the company's own Gen Z lab. Hello to all of you, and thanks for joining me today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we get started, a reminder to our viewers, if you have questions for our panel, please leave them in the comments and we'll try to get to them during the conversation. Thanks to those who already submitted questions before today. So I want to start by prodding this notion of duality, which I just laid out. This question, I'd like each of you to answer. Do you get the sense that young people view AI in this way, as a kind of coin with 2 more or less equal sides, one negative, one positive, or are they seeing it in a different way? Julia, we could start with you.
Sure. I think generally, yes, like most people, Gen Z does sort of see AI as a double-edged sword. And I think maybe what sets us apart from some older generations is I think we have a bit more of a positive spin on it. And of course, I can't speak for my entire generation. And there are certainly young people leading the charge around conversations like biases in AI and copyright concerns and all sorts of, rightfully concerning issues. But in general, I think we have a pretty strong appetite for AI and this kind of emerging tech. I mean, we're used to seeing it in the ads that we're fed, in the content that's on our For You page, in our Netflix recommendations. So I do think we're going to be harsh critics when it comes to how brands and companies are using it. But I think compared to older generations, we have a high tolerance, and I personally am mostly optimistic about AI. So I would lean into, that being our approach as a generation, especially when compared to older ones.
Clay?
Absolutely. I think there is definitely the double-edged sword part of it that most of my generation does see. I think one thing to note is that my generation has seen so much of this rapid change over the past decade, whether it's new social medias coming in, new ways to shop. We saw the rise of Amazon. We've seen everything go digitized. So we are a little bit used to this change. And so as maybe scary as it may be or as exciting it may be, we're a little bit more come to adapt. And so while we look forward to the future, we are a little bit ready to face the changes.
And Alan?
I love that you started with this question, Asa, because actually I thought about this a few minutes ago, but actually a couple months ago, Edelman's Gen Z Lab had a mini conference and we actually touched on this topic. And so we essentially conducted a poll among our Gen Z colleagues about whether they're afraid or excited about AI. And the results over, I think, 200 people were split 50-50. And I think it makes a lot of complete sense if you kind of unpacked and contextualize this. And I think Clay had touched on it as well. But, if you think about all the societal and technological changes that have really shaped our upbringing, there's a lot of things that we could talk about, right? But there's this common myth, I think, that every Zoomer is really good at using tech and adopting new tech, and that's only partially true. But I don't think it necessarily applies to AI. I think we're really good at using tech because our approach has been very human driven, and a lot of the main technologies that were considered transformative in the last decade when we grew up were the smartphone and social media. So if you take that and you compound it with the pandemic, climate disaster, war, information overload, and that things that we contend with on a day-to-day basis, it makes a lot of sense why there's a degree of fear, excitement, or even cautious optimism within this generation about AI. So I think for me personally, I think I kind of fall in that 50-50 split. Not fully sure where I fully stand right now, but I think the possibilities are just starting to emerge.
So one concern regarding AI, and we've seen a lot of this in our coverage and just because it affects industry, is how the technology may upend the workplace, potentially replacing human jobs or doing away with the need for specialized skills. Julia, is Gen Z worried about this specifically?
I think Gen Z is definitely worried about it, especially a lot of young creatives who are worried about how things like their writing or their art could be, majorly affected by AI that can, do similar skills or even like build off of the work that they're putting out into the world. I also think that Gen Z is in a bit of an unfortunate position just where we are in our careers, because it's obvious that AI is going to be a huge part of our professional lives and we have a lot of our careers ahead of us. But at the same time, we weren't really trained on AI, and especially, emerging generative AI in school or in any of our early job training. So we're kind of, looking to employers to fill that gap or really on our own when it comes to figuring that out, which, if you want to look at it in a more positive way, is a great opportunity to kind of be a self-starter and lead that change as a young person in your organizations. But yeah, I think that we're tasked with a lot to learn right now, and it can either be a great opportunity or a little scary, depending on your approach to the new tech.
So a reader who asked to remain anonymous wants to know from each of you, what concerns or hopes do you have regarding AI's impact on your career prospects and job satisfaction? Alan, we can start with you, then go to Clay, then Julia.
I think for me, what I am really thinking about is, I think something Julia had mentioned, which is upskilling and career advancement, right? So not to bring up more stats, but recently Edelman did conduct a trust study about trust in the workplace, and 83% of employees do believe that career advancement is a strong expectation or a deal breaker when looking for a job. And when we're thinking about the climate around this technology and the rapid clip of adoption, there's a real concern that we're going to get left behind because we're the youngest in the workforce, and there's a lot of responsibility that's placed on us to figure out this new tech. At the same time, I think employers have a lot of catching up to do when it comes to kind of upskilling everyone to be prepared to have a career that's enabled by AI, whether it's in training to be a prompt engineer or learning how to use GPT for social content. I think we're just in the early innings of things. And so my hope is that there's going to be more specific upskilling opportunities. The concern really is that we have to move quickly, and we have to move very thoroughly and carefully because of the risks of the technology.
Clay.
Yeah, one of my concerns, and I can echo a few of my peers that I talked to about this, is the devaluation of our jobs, which very similar to what Alan just said. Part of my job can now be automated. Let's say the busy work part of it. Is that justification for my employer to cut my salary or to offer me a lower salary going in? Is my position in the workforce losing its value because a robot can do part of my job? I think that's been the big concern for me, at least. I work in the fashion and retail industries. There will always be people in this industry. You can't fully replace humans in fashion. But unfortunately, that is the direction we're going, where we see new parts of our jobs being taken on a pretty rapid basis, and we're still at the early stages of AI. So there is a big concern of what AI looks like in 5 years and how much of my job can that take up.
And Julia, anything else you want to add?
I guess just on the positive side of that, I think what makes me excited about AI and the opportunities it has for me in my career is like really just efficiency and being able to possibly excel and develop in my career faster and better. I mean, that's not to say that there's not concerns with how much you should involve AI in your day-to-day, but I know the word thought partner gets tossed around a lot, but I also like to think of it as just like a work friend, especially as so many of us are working remotely. Like, how can I just toss ideas around with this tool or make it check my work or help me get the bad, obvious ideas out of the way? I mean, in that way, I think AI has already made me a better marketer, a faster employee, a more efficient employee. So putting a lot of the other obvious concerns that everyone here has mentioned aside, I am excited about that opportunity and how it can help me in my career and other young people.
So, Clay, you touched on retail. There's all kinds of data pointing towards retail's impact by AI. I recently wrote a story on how a report that found that the vast majority of Gen Zers are excited by the improvements that AI will bring to e-commerce. Why do you think this is?
I think it's echoing off the back of the pandemic, where more people have honed into the modality of e-commerce and have changed the way they think about shopping. Whereas maybe pre-pandemic, the first thought when they thought about shopping was going to a store, and now they are immediately thinking of an e-commerce option. One thing that I think is exciting to people is how much more fun it is becoming on kind of the lighter note, whether that's a few companies have invested in personal stylists that are powered by AI, where they can genuinely spend as much time as you want with them, and they can build you an outfit based off of what you've liked, what all your shopping history is, and that makes it a much more personal process. On the in-store side of that, we're seeing a lot of changes in fitting rooms, and we're seeing changes in replan processes that are making your shopping trips more efficient, more exciting, more fun to do with friends. And so overall, there is that excitement towards it. I think there is that wariness, though, of, I'm sure we'll get into this, the data protection part of, I'm giving you all this information to make my shopping a little bit better, but how much of that are you storing? And am I now part of your business strategy versus just a customer?
So sort of on that point, there's obviously a lot of excitement, but excitement does not give license to marketers to go absolutely buck wild with using AI in e-commerce. What do you think marketers should know about overdoing the use of AI and how that might rub Gen Z the wrong way? Mr. Clay, yeah, you can go.
I think the overuse, it all goes back to authenticity, which is a word that we toss around, feels like every day in retail, of what is authentic, what is transparent. And I think the big marketing push has been on the creative side. There's been a huge push towards AI art and AI, content and how that feeds into the fashion world. Whereas on the other side of it, there's very specific targeted marketing, whether that's in email channels where they can genuinely check, when are you most likely to check your email and make a purchase from it, and that data point and how they can use that for you, or how many times you can scroll on your phone, where are you scrolling the most. All those very, very niche makes you such an engaged consumer that you get consumer fatigue. When marketers are starting to turn everything into an ad using AI, you feel like you can never escape it. And so I think that's where the line is when you're starting to push every aspect of my time on social media or on technology into being an ad, then I become exhausted, and then overall the bond is broken.
Alan or Julia, anyone else want to add in?
Yeah, I can chime in. Clay, I actually love what you said about, authenticity and then excessive use. So I think, where I want to start is with media literacy. I think it's become a really pervasive issue, within Gen Z, especially on platforms like TikTok now, right? I think a lot of us know and can personally attest to this generation's unique penchant for fact checking and digital forensics. But what I really think is the bigger issue with AI personally is that the emerging use of, tools like DALL-E or Midjourney to create synthetic media and AI art. As Clay mentioned. So I think, as more brands start using AI in their marketing or comms, there's a significant responsibility for them to be transparent with us about the tools that they're using and how they're using it. And right now, I think what we're seeing is that there's this huge onus that's placed on the consumer to authenticate any piece of content that they see online, whether it's physical text or visual media. It's going to be much more exhaustive for people, not only Gen Z, but to fact check every piece of content that they see on social media, like almost like it's a game of spot the difference, right? And so that level of exhaustion that you experience is going to cause a real risk for brands being perceived as inauthentic if they use AI excessively, but they don't disclose it to their consumer base. So, any worthwhile engagement, with AI, I think going forward does need to be trusted. And the first way to start gaining that trust is by being transparent and being really authentic and really figuring out when is the right time for me to use this tool for my ad campaign or my social copy, whatever it may be.
I agree with you. And just to kind of hammer in on the transparency point, I mean, it's become a meme online for Gen Z to call out any sort of like ridiculously generic or obvious thing that someone says, or like, a very bland looking apartment tour. I mean, people love to just say, oh, did AI generate this? Like, was this written by AI? It's become like a dig to imply that a person or a brand used AI to create something. So I think that just drives home how critical Gen Z is going to be about this. And that doesn't mean they're against the use of AI in content. They just want to know that that's what's happening and not have brands pretend like they're, not using AI when they obviously are.
For those of you just joining us, I'm Asa Heiken, technology reporter at Ad Age, and I'm here today with a panel of Gen Z professionals. We have Julia Dixon, Lute and Allen Pham. I want to give a few shout outs to some listeners. Justin and Ray from New York, Jose Luis from Texas, Anna from Florida, Juan Miguel from Spain, Joseph from Illinois, Kabiru from Nigeria, Jennifer from New Jersey, and Jorge from Portugal. If you have questions for any of these speakers, please leave them in the comments and we'll try to get to them toward the end. So on your last note, Julia and Alan and Clay, we were talking about sort of this intersection of authenticity and how AI can play a role. Alan, if a young consumer knows that a brand is using AI in its efforts to reach them, you spoke about transparency. Is that the degree of transparency that you're talking about, that simply just knowing AI was used, or do brands need to go even further and talk about the specific ways that they were using them?
Listen, I think, the more information and transparency you can provide, the better. I'm sure not every consumer will look at every brand's, ethical principles behind AI, but it is nice to know that that is there and existing for them. And I think this kind of reminds me of, this ongoing push that you're seeing in consumer brands to really disclose, how sustainable their packaging is and whatever it may be. And I think it's going to be something in the same vein with AI as it is with sustainability. And that's going to be the expectation going forward.
So that's an interesting point, because, in another area of technology, Web3, this was obviously very trendy in the past year or two. What's emerged out of that space has really been a need to keep the technology in the background. So, for example, with NFTs, consumers don't really care about the technology itself. They care about the benefits the technology offers. You would say, Alan, that young consumers care about the technology itself when it comes to AI?
I think a lot of us have to care more about it. It's going to be, one of the most transformative facets of society in the next 10 years. And so we do want to understand it. Whether or not we're technically, logically capable of reading through all the jargon is a different question. But I think we are curious and we really want to know and understand all the mechanics behind, how companies are using AI. At the end of the day, it really comes down to just having the comfort of knowing that information is accessible to you and you're not being manipulated.
So let's dive into a couple more audience questions. Each of you can weigh in on these. Clay, we'll start with you on this one. Sonia from New York asks, in your opinion, name a global apparel brand or retailer that is getting AI right.
I would say I don't think anyone's getting it right yet, but I think there's some really exciting things happening that are leading to that path. One thing that comes to mind at first is H&M, of all places. They're using a new AI strategy to scan receipts to build a new replen system for fashion. Allocation is the name of the game, and if you can get your hot demand items in the store faster, you make more money, and it's a more efficient process overall. So by scanning those receipts, you can actively track, your most popular items, your faster turn, and get a new product there. Another person I think is doing a cool thing is Olay, where they have these skin professionals online powered by AI, where they can take a picture of your skin, scan it, and do like a full dermatology report using AI, which is something that you typically need to either go pay for, go in store for, go out of your way to get. But having that free option to you as a consumer, it makes the retail shopping experience more personal, more efficient, and more fun.
Yeah, Julia, go ahead.
I was just building on what Clay said. I think what makes those examples powerful is that they solve actual consumer pain points versus doing something marketing-y like a digitally generated outfit or a metaverse fashion show. There might be some examples where that works, but for the most part, I think it's just hype versus solving for any actual problem. So the use cases that excite me, and I know brands are starting to do this, at least in theory, are like, how can AI show, exactly how a piece of clothing is going to fit my exact measurements on like an AI generated model? I mean, these very tactical and specific problems that we've just never had a great solve for are great fits for AI. And those are the things that actually get me excited because they're going to make a real difference.
Alan?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with Julia. I think, to say the least, I think one of the most creative uses that I have seen personally has actually come from Edelman. I think back in December 2022, I believe, Edelman Canada actually worked with Hellman's famous Mayo brand. And we actually used GPT to create some content in our influencer marketing program that was around using ingredients from Hellman's to reduce waste and showing recipes using GPT. So there was a lot of interesting learnings that we got from that. But, as Julia mentioned, it's always great seeing GPT or AI being used in a way that actually will have a positive impact, not only for the business, but also for the consumer and society as well. And, I think the Hellman's example is a really good, purposeful example of that.
Moving on, an anonymous listener asks, how does Gen Z feel about the environmental impacts of AI, given the amount of energy needed to process some prompts? Anyone want to take this?
I can a little bit. For some context, I do sustainable advising for a couple of retailers. And I think one of the big concerns, at least for Gen Z, is how quiet it has been on the front of AI and sustainability. Similar, if you go back, a few decades, looking at the electric car, where no one was talking about its societal impacts and its effect on the environment. I think that there is big concern that no one's necessarily talking about it because that means there's no legislation for it. And so the louder activists can be and the louder retail professionals can be to push these issues of exactly where it's pulling too much, how we can fix it. I think there is excitement there to see. I think it's more on the Democrat side, but there are some younger people in Congress that are pushing some of these important questions of where are we going to step in as the government to put on limitations to protect the planet while still furthering this technology.
I think that's a really interesting question, actually. So I work in enterprise tech, but a lot of people, I think, friends, other Gen Zers that I am acquainted with, I don't think people have necessarily focused so much on the computing intensive nature of AI and how much electricity and energy is needed to run a data center or a computer to run those large language models. But I think that's going to be an emerging issue that's going to come up. I think especially as the demand for computing continues to accelerate in the future, it's going to be extremely high. And so we're still quite early in this, but I think more people are going to start paying attention. I just haven't heard that many people within my generation talking about data center and AI sustainability.
I think to that point, there's just so much fatigue around like individual responsibility when it comes to sustainability that it's like, in my opinion, it's one step too far than I think most Gen Z are like ready to even consider. That said, obviously Gen Z is very conscious of sustainability and environmental impacts. So I do think it's something we're going to start hearing more about as people actually learn like how much of a problem it could be.
So another area that AI is sort of opening up for more exploration and possible concern is just with regards to data analysis and collection. How do you all feel, and this is a question from Anna on LinkedIn, how do you feel about your biometrics out there being sort of taken in by AI and the possibility of that being lost or misused? Clay, we'll start with you on this.
Yeah, my mind immediately goes to the conversation a few months ago about AI models. Levi's was the big story there, where they said they were going to explore using AI to generate models for their customers to have a better, diverse set of models there. And the question that came up from, I talked to models about this, and the question was, where is that being pulled from? The faces that you use to make an AI model, is that coming from model's face? And then with that, is there money involved? Are you paying that model to use their likeness? What is being allowed to pull from? We just saw it with the writer's strike of what is AI allowed to pull from? Where is the competition aspect? I think personally, how I feel about my biometrics being out there, if I'm honest, I'm at peace with it, because that is just the generation I've grown up in. My face has been on social media since who knows how long. And so I'm sure that my face is out there in some database. It's kind of above me. I can't do much about it, but I can be cognizant of it and I can do my best to protect myself, but it is a little bit above me.
Julia, you have any comment on this?
I mean, most of me agrees with Clay. I just feel like I'm past the point of return of my data and images being out there. That said, I think there are some particular concerns around, deep fakes being made about women and very sexually explicit content out there that, of course, was not consensual, and the way that people's images can be used really quickly and inexpensively with AI is definitely terrifying. I'm not sure how much can be done is also my sad reaction to that. So it's a bit of a again, I think we're all a bit fatigued about how much our data is already out there, but I do think about it and I think it's kind of scary.
Alan, any last words on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all in the same boat here. If we're all so digitally native at this point that it doesn't really matter what data about us is out there already. But I do think there's a real concern, outside of the U.S. and from the human rights perspective about state actors and malicious actors using facial identification or facial recognition technologies enabled by AI to persecute more people, or even to Julia's point about making deep fakes. I think there's a real ethical concern here that I think right now a lot of us in the US are kind of shielded from, but there are broader issues at stake here that I think people should start paying attention to as well.
Appreciate all your honesty on this question. We have time for one more. We have about a minute and a half left. This is a provocative one. Another anonymous listener asks, is AI making the new generations lazier? Julia, we can start with you and then go to Clay and then Alan.
I feel strongly about this one, and the answer is no. I mean, we are going to probably have to raise the bar in terms of expectations when it comes to human creativity and, human processing. AI is going to help in some ways, in the same way like a calculator made math easier in one way, but just raised the bar on how much we could do. I think we're going to see that kind of, change with AI. The bar's just going to be raised. I think we're going to see a spirit of experimentation. We're doing a lot of that at Weber Shandwick right now on our futures team and our young fellows. Just young people are leading the charge, experimenting with all of this. So I think it's going to be the opposite. We're getting less lazy by the day, at least in my experience.
Clay.
I absolutely agree. I think Julia had a great point earlier where AI can be a work buddy, and I totally use that. I know someone on YouTube asked a question about how we use it every day. In my research, I'm having AI pull research for me. If I need to find 10 surveys, AI can do the work to find me the surveys, and I can pull from that. And then that powers me to do better work. So I don't think it's making us lazier. I think it's making us work smarter, not harder.
And Alan.
I mean, everything everyone said. I think part of it too is that we're going to be trained to use this, and there's going to be a big responsibility for us to catch up to the tech. So really, to Julia's point, I think there's good optimism here about Gen Z being able to use this in a more effective way. I think the bigger question is, how is Gen Alpha going to use it? Are they going to be lazy? So that's maybe something else to pay attention to in 10 years' time.
Yeah, well, when those little children are old enough, maybe we'll have them on the panel. Great. Well, that is our time for today. A big thank you to Julia, Clay, and Alan for joining me. And thank you to all the listeners for tuning in. If you'd like to stay up to date on the interplay between AI, advertising, and Gen Z, be sure to follow AdAge's daily coverage. We write about this stuff a whole lot. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.